All right, good afternoon. The webinar will begin shortly. It'll be a few minutes until we get started while we wait for attendees to join. So thank you so much for your patience. Thank you if you are just now joining us. We'll get started in a moment. We're just waiting for everyone to load into the webinar. Good afternoon again. If you're just now joining us, give us a few minutes. We're waiting for everyone to join. It takes just a few minutes. Thank you, everyone. Just give us about one more minute and we'll go ahead and get started. Just want to make sure everyone is joined before we begin. All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. So good afternoon. My name is Jamie Moore, and I'm a practice management advisor at the Florida Bar. Welcome to today's webinar, When Meditation Doesn't Work, Practical Solutions for Managing Burnout. I want to thank the Standing Committee on Mental Health and Wellness of Florida Lawyers, especially the Education Subcommittee, for organizing the program today. During the webinar, if you have a question for our speakers, please post it in the question and answer section at the bottom of the screen. Some of the questions will be answered by our moderator at the end of the presentation and our speakers. Due to time constraints, there may not be time to answer all of your questions. At the end of the webinar, I will provide everyone with the course number and the credits that you will use to self-report in your member portal. And now for a brief disclaimer. CLE presentations are intended for educational purposes only and do not replace professional judgment. Statements of fact and opinions expressed are those of the presenters individually, and unless expressly stated to the contrary, are not the opinion of the Florida Bar or its committees. The Florida Bar does not endorse or approve and assumes no responsibility for the content, accuracy, or completeness of the information presented. Any feedback should be provided to the event organizer. If you have any questions, you can email legalfuel@floridabar.org. Again, that is legalfuel@floridabar.org. At this time, it is my privilege to introduce Dr. Kristie DeBlasio, the moderator for today's webinar. Dr. Kristie is a licensed clinical psychologist and health coach practicing in Palm Beach County. She earned her MA and PhD degrees from Loyola University and Nova Southeastern University. She also completed specialized training in nutrition and healthy living from Cornell University. Dr. Kristie currently helps children, adolescents, and adults suffering from various mental health conditions, emotional symptoms, and life challenges. In addition to therapy, she provides gifted psychoeducational and neuropsychological testing and is co-host of the Slightly Sane podcast. Thank you, Dr. Kristie, for moderating today, and I will now turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jamie. It is my pleasure to be here serving as moderator along with our panelists. Today's topic will be on burnout, as Jamie mentioned, and I'm going to start by just introducing our lovely panelists here today. I'd like to start by introducing L'Oreal Ascott. Attorney Ascott earned her Juris Doctor from the University of Florida Levin College of Law and is now solo practitioner at LA law firm based in Miami, Florida. She previously worked at and advised various governmental entities. Attorney Ascott presently serves on the board of directors for various organizations and is involved in various civic and voluntary bar organizations. We also have Yolanda Strader. Attorney Strader earned her Juris Doctor from the University of Miami School of Law and is now the co-managing attorney at Strader Pascal. She began her career at Big Law, rising to the ranks of shareholder before founding Strader Pascal with her brother. Attorney Strader is a mother of 2 young children, serves as vice chair of the 17th Judicial Circuit Grievance Committee, and is actively engaged in various voluntary and civic organizations. And lastly, we have Margaret Peggy Hewitt. Attorney Hewitt earned her Juris Doctor from the University of Florida's Levin College of Law. She now works as the Resources and Services Manager at Florida Lawyers Mutual Insurance Company. She previously spent her legal career as an assistant state attorney, assistant general counsel for the Orange County Sheriff's Office, in-house counsel at Walt Disney World, and as a partner at Jones, Hurley, and Hand. Thank you so much again, panelists, and welcome everybody. So I wanted to start off our topic by going through a definition of burnout. Now, there are different definitions that you may find. I am a little biased and I picked one from the American Psychiatric Association, which is the board that we follow. It defines burnout as the physical, emotional, or mental exhaustion accompanied by decreased motivation, lowered performance, and negative attitudes towards oneself and others. It results from performing at a high level until stress and tension, especially from extreme and prolonged physical or mental exertion, or an overburdening workload take their toll. So now I'd like to bring our panelists into the conversation and begin by having them share their own experiences of burnout. So Peggy, if you wanted to start us off and just tell us when you first began workplace burnout and how you knew what it was.
Surprisingly, I didn't suffer from burnout even with working at the state attorney's office here in the Ninth Judicial Circuit. I first really experienced burnout as in-house counsel, simply because of the fact that I didn't specialize in any particular area of the law other than civil defense when I started with Disney, and I was given a lot of different responsibilities. The longer I was there, the more responsibilities I was given, and some of them were disjointed in that they didn't really have any real relationship to one another. I was sort of like the general practitioner, and that can be unwieldy and started to create a lot of anxiety because I was working so hard. I didn't really have an opportunity to really feel like I was mastering any of the new responsibilities that I was being given. As that continued, and the anxiety over feeling like I needed to give back some of those responsibilities, and then the pushback that I got from the rest of the firm and the corporation itself on giving back some responsibilities. Unfortunately, during that era, the 90s, I had grown up in an era where, we just gotten out of the selfish 80s, the me generation, and where success and monetization of everything was really and truly everything. That the job was actually overwhelming me to the point where I did not feel that if I didn't continue to strive and succeed and take on additional responsibilities, I was not being successful. And I did this until the job was making me physically ill. I realized that I was suffering from burnout when my mom shook me and my husband shook me and just said, "We never see you. Your daughter never sees you. This is something that's starting to affect your health and your personal relationships with the rest of your family." And that's when I realized I needed some help. But in the 90s, there weren't the resources that we have. I knew nothing about work-life balance until well into the 2010s. So, and probably because I was so busy, I was just simply not aware of them out of ignorance, I never took the opportunity to seek out any assistance or help or even realize that it was out there. And I think that people today, while the wellness industry is actually kind of being mocked at this point in time, as in, everything's wellness, everything's work-life balance. I really wish there had been resources back when I was suffering from, a physically and psychologically debilitating burnout that I couldn't even recognize. So I think that what we're trying to do today by teaching, especially attorneys in Florida that are multitasking, who have families, who have children, in a lot of situations, we are not only taking care of kids, we're also taking care of aging adult parents. You know, with everything that gets piled on with the added anxiety of taking care of other people's problems as attorneys, I do think that the life work balance being addressed by the various resources and physicians such as yourself and psychologists just as yourself, Dr. DeBlasio, are really, really important. We need to recognize what it is before it makes us physically ill.
Absolutely. Thank you, Peggy. Yolanda, would you care to share also?
Sure. You know, a lot of what Peggy said resonates with me, but I will say that I think I recognize I may be experiencing some form of burnout during the pandemic. I had just made shareholder at my law firm, and that was sort of like a transition period. I just had my second child, and it was a time not only when we were dealing with sort of the pressures of now working remotely, working with your kids in the house, working around the clock, not recognizing when you really need to stop because, you know, you're at home anyways, might as well do the work. It was sort of that period of time when I realized, okay, I think I'm experiencing, you know, some sort of disconnect here with what the things that used to bring me joy. So, you know, happy to serve on your DE&I committee because that's a meaningful thing to me. That typically would bring me joy. And I realized that it sort of felt like, well, you know, is that the best use of my time now? Am I really creating change? And you start to become a little bit cynical, and you're going through all of this while the whole world is also experiencing things like George Floyd's murder and Breonna Taylor's murder. And so you are going through this, and it exasperates your feelings of, am I really doing what I need to be doing to contribute to society, contribute to my profession? Am I really being present for my family? All these things sort of come together. And I recognize that, like I said, it was because I wasn't motivated to do some of the things traditionally I always wanted to do. And I would be happy to wake up early to do or work late to do. No longer really spoke to me because I was like, I don't know if I'm making the change that I want to make. So I think that's when I realized it, and immediately wanted to focus on solutions to make things better.
Thank you. Thank you. And L'Oreal?
So Yolanda brought up a lot of good points about the pandemic. I have to say, for me, the experience of burnout happened at various stages of my career. And it always correlated with me acquiring new responsibilities or taking on new roles in my life. So the first time I experienced burnout was when I had my daughter and went back to work. At that time, I was division chief at DCF. And I had the pleasure of taking 6 months leave with her, right? So by the time I got back to work, you know, we had great sleep patterns. Everything was great. But as division chief, I was on call when my line attorneys were also on call. So that same work pattern that Yolanda mentioned, waking up really early to work, staying up late. I'm more of a morning person than a night owl. So I'm up at ridiculously early hours in the morning. Some still consider it to be nighttime actually. But nevertheless, I realized when I had my daughter, and I probably shouldn't be telling you all this, but I hope this is a statute of limitations on this. She had to be at least 8-9 months. And I was knocked out and she was in the bed with me and she fell off the bed. I was so upset that she fell. She didn't hurt herself. Praise God, she's great. But I was so upset that she fell off the bed. And I knew that instead of me spending that time, and this was, you know, after I got off of work, so I was exhausted. Instead of me spending that time bonding with my baby, telling her how much I missed her and hugging up on her, I was knocked out because I was tired. And I fell asleep on her and she fell off the bed. I made her promise not to tell her daddy. So I hope he doesn't know. But I knew at that moment that something had to give. I wore too many hats involved in different organizations and still in management position at work, so to say, and yet playing mommy. So I knew that I had to be mindful of the things that I had on my plate, and made up in my mind at that moment to always continue to check in, to make time for me, to get back into the habits of exercising, not only to, feel great about myself, but to increase my energy level, to be mindful of the things that I put into my body, both physically, spiritually, and mentally, right? Make all those steps earlier on. Because, of course, before the kids, I was the first one in the office and the last to leave. And you can be involved in all of these things because as a young married couple, we were both involved. It was great. But as new responsibilities added onto my plate, I had to be more mindful that I wasn't biting off more than I could chew, so to say.
Absolutely. And everyone is speaking to something that is important to keep in mind. You want to think of us as we've only got like one fuel tank and we've only got so much to give. And it would be really nice if we had this amount to give towards our professional endeavors and this much to give towards our personal endeavors, and they don't bleed into one another. But that, unfortunately, is not the case. We're one human being, one tank, and it's important to keep in mind the whole person, what's going on all around us, because we're not robots, and that's great. That's a great quality to have. That's also the thing that sometimes makes it a little bit more stressful for everybody, is I have to really kind of put on these different hats, whether it's parent hat, partner hat, professional hat, whatever other hat any of us wears. They all weigh heavy sometimes when they're piled up. So all of these things are really important to keep in mind for burnout. There's also I found some other questions. This now comes from the Mayo Clinic to just kind of keep in mind, because they're good little markers to ask yourself from time to time. So, have you become cynical or critical at work? Do you drag yourself to work and have trouble getting started? Have you become irritable or impatient with coworkers, customers, or clients? Do you lack energy to be consistently productive? Do you find it hard to concentrate? Do you lack satisfaction from achievements that used to give you satisfaction? Are you using other substances, including food, drugs, or alcohol, to feel better or to not feel at all? Have your sleep habits changed? And are you troubled by unexplained headaches, stomach or bowel problems, or other physical complaints? So this is a good list. I like this list, but it's also important to keep in mind, especially in my profession and anybody who's ever experienced depression, there's a lot of overlap here. There's ways that one can easily, burnout can very easily lead to depression. And there are some subtle differences. I mean, typically what we see with depression is it's more of an internal experience, meaning like sometimes a person can feel a certain way and they really can't put their finger on why at all. They just feel like crap. Burnout, as we're talking about, can have a more external thing. I mean, we're focusing a lot on professional burnout right now, even though we're talking about how personal can lead to professional burnout. And also the length of time is important to keep in mind. Burnout is actually it is a diagnosable thing. Where it starts to bleed into depression is when you're talking about months and months of feeling a certain way, and even with the interventions, a person still doesn't feel any better. That's where you're talking more of depression. But it's very confusing. They do overlap. So I do really kind of encourage everybody, if you're not sure which one it is. And the other thing is depression has kind of this helpless component. where you just don't feel like things are going to get any better, even though you look around and life is great and there's nothing you would actually necessarily want to change, but you still feel like crap. But if you're not sure, reach out, talk to your colleagues or talk to one of my colleagues in my profession if you're not really sure, because obviously if you can get support, if it's something a little more serious, that'll help. Like we mentioned before, intervening earlier down the line is always better than trying to catch up to what's going on. So just some things to keep in mind. They also mentioned some vulnerability factors, so things that generally happen that can keep us at a greater risk of experiencing this. So if we feel like there's a lack of control in our work environment, if we don't feel like we're really making a difference in the decisions that are being made, especially the ones that affect us on the day-to-day. It was also mentioned about schedule. It is really important for everybody to keep in mind that we do, like it or not, if everybody kind of thinks of themselves, you can probably figure out periods of productivity, meaning like times when work is just a little bit easier, you're a little bit more peppy than others. Sometimes it's when you have your caffeine, sometimes you're just naturally that way. And also we kind of slow down at a certain time. So if we're working hours that don't really fit with who we think we are as our best self, then that kind of puts us at risk of experiencing the burnout. Also, when there's unclear job expectations or when you feel like things aren't so secure, they're a little bit unstable in the environment where you're working. And that can be on a global scale as well as a little microcosm, just to keep in mind. Dysfunctional workplace dynamics, anything that's monotonous. So not that it necessarily has to be something wrong going on, but that it's just kind of we're on autopilot. So we lose our pep with what we're doing because it's same. Obvious lack of support, social support, not getting acknowledgement. And then like a lot of us had mentioned already, that work-life imbalance. So it is a legitimate issue. And I'm glad that it's a topic that we're talking about today. So I want to pivot and focus more now on additional solutions. And that's what I'm going to bring in our panelists again. So Peggy, if you wouldn't mind just sharing, I know you had already, everybody kind of put a little bit of tidbit as they were talking before too, but if you could just focus a little bit more on how you handled it to get yourself out of the burnout.
Well, my first attempts were to try to limit the piling on. And when that really didn't work out from a cultural, the corporate law firm cultural environment, I tried some other things. I tried riding my motorcycle to work once in a while. I tried playing, forcing my daughter to play golf with me once or twice a month. I mean, just trying to do things that were more outdoorsy, just completely divorced from the practice of law and what I was feeling during the week. Even if it, because I recognized that, first of all, I was already a child of anxiety. I going to law school and then becoming, a lawyer especially when I was with the state attorney's office, feeling like my job was extraordinarily important because I was really and truly dealing with people's lives. And I believed in fundamental fairness. And I truly believed that I was doing a really great job for something that was really important. And when I left the state attorney's office, when I left public practice and public service, I didn't get the same satisfaction. And my anxiety was therefore not being, tamped down by, the really great feelings that I had about the actual work that I was doing and what I was accomplishing for society in general. And all of a sudden I was dealing with, with commercial enterprise versus, should we be working on different ways to reduce crime or reduce recidivism, looking at the criminal justice system with, fundamental fairness and equal justice before the law kind of ideals. I didn't have that anymore. So I went out to try to find something that was going to replace that, what apparently was a huge satisfaction hole in my particular job satisfaction level and my life. And I tried sports and I tried other activities. And unfortunately, they didn't tap down the anxiety that I felt that can unfortunately feed upon itself. And I was concerned that it would turn into a depression, because I was really and truly unhappy in my job. And I do want to say that the one thing that really did work was quitting. I have to say that the weight that came off of me when I went home and explained to my family that I was no longer employed, and they celebrated. I was absolutely overwhelmed by the reaction, and it gave me back some of the self-worth that I felt that was missing from my previous vocation, my previous positions, in public service. So I really want to just kind of emphasize that there are certain practices of law that are more rewarding monetarily and more rewarding internally and psychologically. And if you don't feel like the practice that you are presently in is rewarding you to the extent that is making your work-life balance work or your job satisfaction work, there are a lot of jobs out there. And despite the initial horror that I felt when making a decision to make such a drastic change in my career, it was quickly assuaged by the fact that there are a lot of jobs out there, and there are a lot of things that you can do with a law degree that don't necessarily leave you with a deep gaping hole in your psyche. So, reach out for help. I mean, the resources are really out there. There are people that have learned an awful lot having gone through burnout and survived burnout and gone on to have just incredible careers. I did. I have, and I continue to do so. I've learned more about work-life balance in the 3 years that I've been a resources and services manager with Florida Lawyers Mutual than I had in the previous 37 years of my career. So the resources are out there. And, we can go to people like you, Dr. DeBlasio, and find out what there is out there and attend programs like this and actually get some real information and access the resources that really weren't there when I suffered from burnout the first time around. So, and there's a lot less stigma about reaching out and getting help. One of the things that I wanted to mention that I believe that you stress as well in your practice, that there are those of us who are drawn to the practice of law because we really want to help people, and that's in our psyche and that's in our makeup. We took the positions that we did and we went into this career to help people. And because of that, we're so used to helping other people, it's very, very difficult for us to reach out and accept help, to ask for help. And even if we ask for it, it's sometimes hard to accept it. We claim that therapy doesn't work for us, or there's too much stigma in going to see a psychiatrist because I don't want to take medication, or will the bar investigate me if I have to, take medication to even out my mood swings or resolve my anxiety. I mean, there's a lot of misinformation out there that people like you and programs like this can help, get rid of.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's, some of the purpose of the committee that was formed. That's actually how I even came to be on this in the first place, is I'm part of the committee. But there are a lot of resources. Just a sidebar too, before I forget, we are going to provide a list of resources. There's going to be actual physical information that is talked about today. We will be providing that at some point afterwards. So Yolanda, if you wouldn't mind sharing also how you kind of work through it.
Sure. So, I spent the vast majority of my career in a larger law firm, sometimes called big law. And I it was an amazing experience. I really enjoyed my time there, was surrounded by mentors, sponsors, people who were dynamic, amazing. It was a great place to work. And yet I still noticed that I was experiencing these symptoms of potential burnout. And so what I ultimately decided to do is slowly started implementing some things that I thought would be helpful. So one, my drive to and from work, when we returned to work, after the pandemic, was my time. That was audiobooks, that was podcasts, that was not my time to do work. I wasn't going to do any conference calls. So, and at that time I had a 1 to 2 hour commute, sometimes a little bit longer. So that was my time. And then I carve out specific time during the day for myself. And here's the kicker. I had to teach myself not to feel guilty for taking that time. So for me, that was working out. It gave me the opportunity to do something that had absolutely nothing to do with the law, that was still good for me, and that made me feel good. And I didn't want to apologize to anyone for that. I didn't want to feel like I had to sneak out of the office to do it. It was on my calendar and it meant something to me, and it was going to happen unless there was a legitimate emergency to prevent it. And I had to really tell myself, it's okay. I earned it. There's nothing wrong with it. And I'm doing the right thing so that I can maintain my practice and be present for my family. So there was that. There was also learning to say no, which is not easy. And I'm pretty sure, Peggy, L'Oreal, I feel like they probably have the same issue too. It's very hard to say no because there are issues we care about. There are causes we want to contribute to. There are people we want to mentor, but at certain points in our lives, we all have 24 hours in a day, and you have to be able to say no. And again, teach yourself that it's okay to say that without the ton of guilt that comes with it. And obviously, that's, a decision. Each decision is going to be different for each person, but you really have to evaluate, what can I do right now without sacrificing some of the things that are really important to me? And if I'm not able to show up the way I want to show up, is it really something that I want to say yes to? I think my last point is that ultimately I did decide to step away from a large law firm environment, not because it was a bad environment. There's certain pressures associated with that environment, I think we all know as attorneys, but because I knew that was the right step for me at this time in my life with young children. I wanted to start my own practice. I wanted to not feel guilty if I decided that I needed to take a day off and do doctor's appointments with my kids. Not feeling like, okay, I have 200 other partners who may be like, what are you doing? Like, and I don't think anyone ever thought that, but you tell yourself that. Now it's like, this is my practice. And if I need to take time for myself or my family, I will do that. So that was my ultimate decision to make that change, that shift. I still do the type of work that I love, but it's just sort of in a different a different platform now.
Thank you. And L'Oreal?
So I'm still working on how to say no. I think I finally learned it during the pandemic. So after serving as president of Wade Cherry for 2 terms, president of Will PD, president of my kids' PTA, and finally having to sit down somewhere during the pandemic, I've finally started figuring out how to actually say no and stick with it, instead of backtracking and allowing people to talk me into things, right? Still working on it. But from that, I realized that I would take on tasks and responsibilities just because I felt like it was my obligation, because I was dedicated to this cause, or passionate about that cause, or, wanted to do all the things. But then I would be resentful to the bosses, to the people in the organization, to even my family, because I'm doing all of this and can't you see? So, I mentioned a little bit earlier how I handle my stress even now, and try to combat burnout is really being mindful and conscious of my feelings, my emotions, and my thoughts, trying to stay present in the moment. And all that sounds very cliche. I do practice yoga. I am getting better with my meditation. Sometimes I can't sit still longer than 3 minutes, 5 minutes is max. I read a book by Deepak Chopra where he said that we should be meditating at least 10 minutes every day. I don't know who has time to sit still like that. I cannot. If you can, hats off to you. You're amazing. But I really am mindful again of moving my body, what I feed my body physically, mentally, and spiritually. I know for me, the exercise has always been my stress relief. I can't really blame the kids. I've been an early riser before I had kids. And the first thing I would do was go to the gym in the morning, come home, do a little bit of work, and then go into the office. And that has still been my routine. For me, it's more about the stress relief than maintenance or weight loss, because I still love to eat everything. So, the stress relief that comes with working out is key and vital to me. Learning how to say no, and most importantly, learning how to step away from certain positions. So to Peggy's point, I think that was extremely courageous to, of course, quit your job. But sometimes we stay in certain situations, especially, jobs as attorneys, where they may be great because they give you a lot of experience and exposure initially, but we really should be mindful that position was only for that moment, and be aware of when it served its purpose and it's a wrap. Like, be comfortable to move on and to know that, you have transferable skills, as we say, you are coachable, you bring to any organization, whether it's a big firm like Yolanda, a small firm, wherever you go, you bring to that organization you. There's only one you. There's only one you with your work ethic. There's only one you with your thoughts, with your drive, with your zeal. So any place that you go is fortunate to have you. I always understood my worth in that regard. I knew what I knew, and I knew what I didn't know. But I knew that no one was going to out-lawyer me and line up the best, and I'll beat them in the courtroom. That's the type of confidence that we have to have, right? I know my law. I'm going to research. I'm going to be prepared. And I said, the only time you're going to win is if I'm not prepared. So, we know that what we bring to the table, and you have to really stand in that and own it. So to all the young lawyers who are listening to us now, or the lawyers who are at a point where you need to pivot in your career, a friend of mine taught me when I was in transition and starting the firm. Even when I started the firm, I was looking for other jobs. I was open to all the opportunities that were coming to me. But similar to Yolanda, what really started to resonate was the flexibility that I had as a mother, going on all the field trips and all the doctor's appointments, and being the PTA president. Hello, like I don't have anything else to do. It really started to click to me what was my priority, and my family was my priority. So I kind of digressed, but I want the younger lawyers to know, own your worth, basically.
Absolutely. And I think it tying into some of the, more the psychological techniques. I don't know if anyone's familiar. There's a technique. It's called acceptance and commitment therapy. The acronym is ACT. Everything in our field is an acronym. But so just remember ACT. But it really does a lot to, if you want to think of two columns, the acceptance piece, there's things that are not going to change. So what I really like, I'm hearing a lot of great things, and I'm making my notes, so I'm hope I don't forget to highlight any of it. But I don't want to speak for all of you because I'm not an attorney. I can only say what I know from working with attorneys. The stress and how busy it is and the demands, that's not going to change. That's a very real part of the profession. So it's not about how can I sometimes change that necessarily. I think that maybe that might not be realistic. So accepting that is going to be a part of the day, and committing to the action of, here are the ways that I can make that day better though. How can I make myself more resilient to this? Because that's a really big, heavy load, right? That's about changing a profession. And what everybody does is so important. I mean, that's big stuff that everybody's dealing with. So how could it not be very serious and very heavy at times, and have so much going on at the same time? So that's not necessarily, again, to try to work to change that would be sometimes like, you know, me hoping that when I walk out the door later from work, that it's going to be 40 degrees in Florida at this time of year. Like, that's just not a realistic expectation of it. I kind of have to like know the way the weather is and work my way around it every time. The other thing that relates to ACT is they focus on these things called values. So values is not necessarily, I want to be a good person, I want to volunteer. You want to think of it of categories of, these are my value buckets. Each bucket is something that's really important to me. Now, I can't pay attention to every bucket at the same time, but at least if I can identify what they are, I know I got to throw a little ball in each bucket from time to time. I got to keep them in my awareness. And the reason why it's so cool is because it's whatever you decide, whether family is a bucket, volunteering, social life, anything, religion, community, anything else you want to put in there, that those are yours to determine. It's your world, it's your life. But we do want to keep peeking at them from time to time, because we can't serve two masters. We can't have everybody and everything that is important to us be a priority at the same time. But we can always take a peek and make sure, have I not really reached out to my friend? You know, I kind of have this to do, but you know what? When was the last time I paid attention to that value bucket? And then it kind of keeps us in check. And it's also based on, these are the things that I already determined make me happy. And that's really, that's something that definitely happens when we're early on in our careers, because less responsibilities and the seriousness of it is a little bit different, at least in my experience. But as we go on and we get more and more and more of those responsibilities, it does become a harder thing. So it is important to step back and think of, when I started this whole journey, what did I see? Like that crystal ball, that world. Like if I could wake up and I would have the time to do everything that I actually wanted to do, what would those buckets be? You know, and again, we're dealing with reality, but that at least helps us to keep some things in check. So that's a little more technical stuff. The other thing that I'm also in practice a big proponent of the simpler solutions. So I really liked it when the whole webinar was named, because I think that, well, first of all, there's a big difference between mindfulness and meditation. And I always say, if it's something that a whole religion does and they have to master it and they dedicate so much of their time, then how the hell are any of us as human beings, when we're in a really stressful moment, supposed to sit there and master it and get a benefit from it? I think that's just, that's a really big expectation. So mindfulness is a lot easier to attain. And it can even come in just the 5 seconds of pivoting to something that we can pay attention to, that's not the stress of what's in front of us and the stuff that we have to do. So, you know, sometimes, like, I have 2 different stairwells on either side of our building. I'll go out one stairwell and walk around and come up the other one. It doesn't have to be much. I think, again, as human beings, we try to overcomplicate things. And then what ends up happening is we get into our heads about whether we're doing it right, or if we have enough time to do it in the first place. And honestly, by the time we're analyzing it in our own, you know, paying attention to the circus upstairs, we could have already done even 10 seconds of giving ourselves a break. That's actually based on, I don't know if anyone's heard of the 20-second rule. It was actually, what's his name? Sean Acker. I might be saying it wrong, but he does, he's done the happiness advantage and then big potential. And he came up with this concept called the 20-second rule. And he was realistic. He was like, we have to be realistic as human beings, that anything that's complicated and is going to take too much time, we're just not going to do, especially when we have all this other stuff going on. So if we just do something like, I'm going to use exercise because exercise was brought up, and it's a really, that is very, very helpful for mental health. If I don't think that I'll have the time in the morning to go to the gym, I'm actually going to either like put my gym clothes, like it's on the chair next to the bed, so I kind of stare at it. Or I've even had people who, if they don't care, they'll go to bed, you know, in something simple. That way, when they pop out of bed, it's already there. They've already eliminated a step. You know, even if, again, it's, I'm going to take a walk up and down the hallway. That helps. All of little tiny things, when taken together, make a big difference. And I, like I said, I love the simple stuff because I think that especially in very successful professional lives that everybody has, it's just not a doable thing to be like, okay, so I need you to set aside 40 minutes to do this. Oh, and then, all right, so I got to drive there, and then now I got to drive back. And it's just the whole, it makes things a little less complicated. So that's something I wanted to just say is the reason it's okay that meditation is hard, because it is a really hard thing to do. And for most people, we try to do it kind of when we're already at our tipping point. So anything we're trying to master when we're already at our tipping point is just going to be a very, very hard thing. Some other simple things, it's using your hands. They actually, they did a little bit further study on the generations coming up and looked beyond just, oh, it's the electronics that are distracting them. They actually realized part of the reason why we have such a harder time, especially them, completely processing and working through our problems, is because it sounds silly, but we're not activating our wrists. So when I was in school, you had to write everything out like this, or you had to really physically do a lot of handwriting. Things were very manual, not just like if I'm texting or even if I'm typing. I just did that without moving my wrist. Simple things like puzzles. I say be a kid again. That's nostalgia. And for us who have kids, it's a nice excuse. You get to spend time with them anyway, so you could stack it. You could going back to the buckets, you can find a way to fill the buckets at the same time. And you're activating that part of the brain that only gets activated when we do move our hands. That is necessary for thorough processing. That's why I have some clients who've mentioned they love to garden. They love to build things. It doesn't have to be much, because again, it's for the purpose of just providing you a little bit of relief. We're not saying that you're going to, build a new facility. We're saying, again, the purpose is to give you benefit. And I also do, before I forget, want to say that for the exercise part 2, just to go back, is if you're doing exercise for the benefit of mental health, you really don't need that much, honestly, at all. I mean, even a couple minutes will do it. If you're doing it for physical health, that's another story, right? If you're trying to lose weight, if you're trying to manage diabetes, high blood pressure, that's a different thing. But talking about just giving yourself a mental break, actually, it does not have to be, again, much at all. And so it makes it more attainable for us. So I could go on, but I really just wanted to check in real quick before we start to close with our panelists, if there's any other fun or silly or simple things that you might recommend doing. Peggy, anything you wanted to add before we go to Q&A?
Well, I just wanted to follow up with the things that you said about do something simple and then using your hands. I rode motorcycles. I built my first motorcycle, Harley Davidson motorcycle, in my college apartment living room in 1978. So without technically dating myself, using your hands and building something and having a finished product can be extraordinarily satisfying, and it can be a great distraction from some of the anxiety situations that being a lawyer place you in. Using your hands, and let me put it this way, as lawyers, we kind of have an invisible product. It's files in, files out, and then they go into the file cabinet, but you don't stand outside of, or you don't stand in your office and look at the closed cabinets and saying, this is what I created. You might have won a case for a client, you might have, done something extraordinary in the practice of the law or won an appeal, but once it goes in the cabinet, it disappears. The case is over. I would get more satisfaction out of a folded pile of laundry, or the baseboards I installed in my home myself, or the crown molding that I painted and then installed myself, or the second or the third motorcycle I built, because I could stand back and see a finished product, and I could look at it and touch it and say, I did this, I accomplished this. The practice of law is completely different. Once that file goes into the file cabinet, it technically disappears. And you still have 6 more files in your in basket to take a look at and work on. But then again, once those tasks are completed, they disappear into the file cabinet. So find something. I found that being a motorcycle mechanic was one of the best things in the world that I ever did. And then I got to go play on the toy I just built. So find something that satisfies you like that. It was unusual, but very, very, very satisfying. So, I did this, and it's like having a baby. It's like, I did this. It's so soul satisfying. It really is. So go fill those holes with something physical as well as psychological. And it can be something really, really simple.
Absolutely. Thank you for bringing that up. Seeing the tangible product, it's very reinforcing. Yep. Yolanda?
Yeah, I second that. I spend my weekends doing meal prep for the family because it's, again, disconnected from the law, and I see that final product, and then throughout the week, my kids have nutritious meals. So it's like a win-win and addresses multiple value buckets. I do want to touch on something very briefly, and that is the fact that Black women professionals experience burnout at much higher levels than any other group, probably because we sort of live at the marginalized intersection of race and gender. And so you're dealing with microaggressions, you're dealing with potential institutional racism, imposter syndrome, the list goes on and on and on. And I guess my thing is, don't be afraid to utilize the resources, speak with your mentors, because it is a legitimate issue, one that really does impact women of color in this profession.
Absolutely. Thank you. And L'Oreal?
So I absolutely agree with Yolanda's perspective regarding Black women. So the other issue with that is that we wear way too many hats. We're involved in a lot of civic organizations, multiple civic organizations, in addition to professional organizations, in addition to your role as a spouse, as a mother, as a child, as an auntie, as a cousin. You wear so many different hats. But what I would suggest is trying to reprioritize. So when we talk about burnout at work specifically, set your priorities for the day and don't allow anyone to derail them. Clearly easier said than done. For me, the phone ringing, the emails coming in, all of that gets me off of my to-do list and then adds additional things on my to-do list. So some of the things that I try to do is to turn my phone off or put it on do not disturb. Take off this freaking Apple Watch because it annoys me with all the alerts, and really try to practice the 1 item rule. So one of my old supervisors told me about the 1 item rule. I multitask way too frequently. My thoughts all over the place. I got 2 computer screens. I'm doing multiple things. Focus on the one thing. If it's writing that motion, bang the motion out before you respond to that email. If it's drafting the petition, prepping for the depot, whatever it is, focus on that one task, the 1 item before you move on to the next thing.
Thank you. Yep, absolutely. And I just wanted to say one last thing too before we go over to Q&A, which is it really does benefit everybody in the equation if you take care of yourself better, right? So if there's any guilt about doing it, taking the time, if there's any guilt about saying or shame about saying no, you really are taking care of yourself, makes you better at whatever you're going to do for anybody else. So it really is for everybody's benefit to find a way to do those things that we're talking about. So thank you again. Jamie, are there any questions that you see?
Yes, we do have a few questions, and thank you all so much for sharing your experiences. So one of our questions is, do any of the panelists feel that their capacity to juggle all their responsibilities change over time and or during certain specific times of life?
Yeah, when you ship the kids off to college, that is a dramatic change. Their responsibilities are suddenly much fewer and much less. Not that you have to ship the kids off necessarily, but having your children get older and become more independent and less dependent upon you, even if it's just for the drive to school, when they start driving themselves, things can come off things come off your desk. But then again, technically I missed driving my daughter to school every day. So it is a trade-off. And but yeah, responsibilities do change over time. Unfortunately, with the practice of law, especially taking on partnerships and ownership of a firm and starting your own firm like Yolanda and L'Oreal have done, the responsibilities have a tendency to pile on for an extended period of time. And I know you might have heard this 1,000 times, but delegate, delegate, delegate. We have a tendency as lawyers to be control freaks, have a tendency to suffer from obsessive compulsive disorders and having to control everything. But you all know your staff, you all know your people, you know you can depend on them or they wouldn't be with you. So force yourself, despite the fact that it feels like you're tearing a part of your body off, start letting go of some of the things that you can as quickly as you feel comfortable, as quickly as you can. Don't hang on to things too long that you can delegate, because those responsibilities, as you become, a much more important part of your firm and take on those additional management responsibilities, especially when you still have small children at home, you need to learn how to let some of those things go that you technically can control, but can turn over to others who are capable of helping you manage your practice.
I have
Excellent.
to definitely agree with that. So to piggyback off of that, I think we should be mindful that life is full of ebbs and flows. So your responsibilities and your duties change at different stages of life. So for those of us who are parents, when the kids are younger and more dependent upon us, then we feel more compelled, of course, to be there, meaning present with them and more focused on the family. But then slowly, as they get a little bit older and more independent, then we feel more free to dive back into the career or expand different aspects of the career. Not that you ever really step out, but just be mindful of the ebbs and flows in life, and taking it easy and being forgiving on yourself to know that you can't really do everything all the time, and you can't be all things to all people, like Dr. Kristie said.
I would just add, in terms of how things change, obviously family dynamics, that's number one, but also it's sort of like I spent a lot of my early career being very dedicated to a number of bar organizations, serving as a past president of the Wilkie Ferguson Junior Bar Association. When you sort of establish, a reputation of someone who's going to be a leader, who's someone who's willing to commit to a cause and do the work, etc., you don't necessarily have to say yes to everything else going forward, because you've already sort of established, no, if I'm going to commit to it, I'll do it, and I'll do it well. That's not to say that you should just rest on your past achievements. Obviously, you want to remain committed, but maybe it's good to, if you can, do it early on. For me, it was before kids. I was able to accomplish a number of things that really sort of set the baseline for me going forward, and changed how much I had to say yes to later on.
Yeah, but sorry to piggyback on Yolanda now. When you become known as that go-to leader, you are that go-to leader. So all of those opportunities are going to keep knocking your way. You know, it's kind of like they identified who the workforce is, and they're going to continue to ride that workforce. So it really is incumbent upon you to know your boundaries, like we talked about earlier, and to learn how to say no. Don't be like Yolanda and I. Learn it early. Learn to say no. I'm still a work in progress. Y'all deal with me.
Well, very good. Thank you all so much. Well, it looks like we've run out of time. Before I share my screen with the course number and credits, Dr. Kristie, do you have any closing thoughts?
No, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody. And I appreciate being a part of this. Again, as not being an attorney, being a different side of the equation. And it's been fantastic. So if there's anything, I'll also be making sure that my email is provided. If there's any additional questions, anything you need, don't hesitate. It's what I'm here for. So.
Excellent. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate this. I'm going to go ahead and put up the slides so you all can see the credits for today's program. So thank you again, Dr. Kristie, L'Oreal, Peggy, and Yolanda, and thank you all for attending today's webinar. The course number for today's webinar is 8022. This webinar has been approved by the Florida Bar Continuing Legal Education Department for 1 hour of General CLE credit, including 1 hour of Mental Health and Wellness CLE credit. Please self-report this course in the member portal. You will receive an email tomorrow via Zoom outlining this information. I also encourage Florida Bar members to take advantage of the Florida Lawyers Helpline, which is a completely confidential and free service, which entitles you to 5 counseling sessions per year to help you develop strategies to overcome life's challenges, balance priorities, and better handle both personal and professional pressures. This concludes today's webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.